Okay, so good morning, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jimena. I am the New York Outreach Coordinator for the Long Island Sound Study. And before I hand this webinar over to our speakers, I'm going to give you a little bit of information that's hopefully useful to you. I'm going to talk about how the webinar is going to flow, and I have a couple of polls for you today. Lee and Beth, could you please mute yourselves? And could you advance the slide, please? Oh, thanks so much. Okay, so for those of you who are not familiar with our program, the Long Island Sound Study was established by Congress in 1985. We are one of 28 national estuary programs working in the US. Of course, we work with the Long Island Sound, and essentially we are a partnership between the EPA and different agencies in New York and Connecticut who work together to help coordinate the different environmental management efforts going on in the ground in both states to help restore and conserve the sound. Next slide, please. So, of course, one of the major things that we do is education. And as part of that, we annually have the Long Island Sound Mentor-Teacher Workshop Program. These are actually pictures from one of our workshops last year in New York. It was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, this year, because of COVID, we had to cancel our workshops, and so we're having this webinar instead. And we hope to, so actually we are really thankful that we have two awesome educators who are able to provide this this year, and we hope to bring this back next year. We'll figure it out somehow next year. Next slide. Another announcement that we wanted to make is that we have a new resource available for educators on our website. It's the Long Island Sound Resource Catalog for Educators and Parents. This is actually a directory of different resources that have been compiled by some of our colleagues at UConn and Connecticut Deep. And they are all educational resources around the topics of the sound and estuary science. And the way that we've organized them in our website is by resource topic, by format, whether it's in person, whether it's a book, etc., grade level. So I'm gonna post the link in the chat once I'm done here. And I'll be sure to send it in the email after the webinar so you can go ahead and explore that if you think it would be useful for you. So now here are our two speakers of the day. We have Kimberly Lee Williams and Dr. Beth Lawrence. So Lee Williams is a New York State master teacher who has been teaching in the classroom, at sea, and in the field for over 20 years. She earned her MS in coastal oceanography at the School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences at Stony Brook, is certified in 7th through 12th grade earth science, biology, and general science with a 5th through 6th grade extension, is an adjunct professor at SUNY Stony Brook, teaching 2 classes, the Long Island Sound Science and Use, and Oceanography, both of which are elective graduation requirements at Smithtown High School, where she is a teacher. Dr. Beth Lawrence is an assistant professor at the University of Connecticut with appointments in the Department of Natural Resources and the Environment and the Center for Environmental Science and Engineering. She is a wetland and plant ecologist, and her lab's research focuses on plant ecology, wetland ecosystems, restoration ecology, carbon cycling, and the consequences of plant invasion in both human impacted and remote field locations, with the broad goal of improving our understanding and conservation of natural systems. In March 2020, Lawrence received the Early Career Teaching Excellence Award from UConn American Association of University Professors, and in 2017, she was awarded the Long Island Sound Research Grant to support her work. And as part of this award, she and Lee collaborated with another teacher to create the module that they're going to be presenting to us today. So with that, Beth and Lee, the floor is yours.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Jimena, for inviting us here today to speak with this great group of educators. I wanted to let you know that this module that we created is publicly available, and we encourage you to view it. If you haven't yet, or if you don't have it open yet, please open it. So I'm going to click on here and just show you, and it should be available up in the chat. But we created this module to be kind of easy to follow. You know, there are links with all the materials. We'll be referring to these throughout the webinar. So if you wanted to open it up in your browser now so that you can kind of click around and follow along, that would be great. This is a 5-day interactive module, and it's one of the outreach projects of the Long Island Sound Study and CIRCA, which is the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Coastal Adaptation. This was funded by these two organizations, and the project, I was the principal investigator of this project, and my collaborators were Ashley Helton and Chris Elphick, who are also professors at UConn. So this project ran from 2017 to 2020. We just wrapped it up, but we were interested in investigating how salt marsh vegetation shifts associated with restoration and sea level rise might alter carbon and nitrogen-based ecosystem services. And so many of you may know that salt marshes are at the interface between land and sea and are really important in terms of carbon sequestration and nitrogen removal. Many of us know that we have too much nitrogen in the Long Island Sound, and so wetlands provide an essential service in removing some of that nitrogen through the process of denitrification. So I'm going to give you the highlight reel here. In some of some parts of the module, I go deeper into the science, but today our objective is really to kind of provide an overview of the module and inspire you to use it in the classroom. So I don't spend too much time on the science here, but the highlight reel, what we found is that vegetation, so the plants that are growing in a specific location, are really good predictors of both carbon and nitrogen processes across marshes with different management histories, different restoration legacies, and in near future sea level rise scenarios. And so this is potentially very useful in terms of in our ability to scale. And one of the particularly interesting findings is that the invasive plant Phragmites australis, which many of you may know, seems to be better at sequestering carbon and removing nitrogen than native Spartina species. And so we touch on that in one of the, I think, day 3 of the module, and we asked students to think more critically about that finding. So let's move forward. So I wanted to, again, thank Jimena and Long Island Sound Study for bringing us here today. So Lee and I wanted to touch base with who we are. Jimena did a nice job of introducing us, but I'm a botanist by training. I love plants. And increasingly over the years, I've gotten interested in wetlands and the important things that wetlands do. And so a lot of my research is in salt marshes, but I also work in freshwater wetlands. Here's in a cattail marsh, I'm measuring greenhouse gas fluxes. But I'm really interested in how the vegetation feeds back into the carbon and nitrogen cycle and the ecosystem services that they provide. And so I'm also a passionate educator. I love teaching and inspiring the next generation of conservationists and scientists. And so I'm really excited to be here today.
Thanks, Beth. And I am also very excited to be here today. So in this picture, I'm holding up a sand shark, a little baby sand shark that we just caught that was sent right back out into the Long Island Sound. And thank you for that really nice introduction, Jimena, and for allowing us to bring this platform to everyone. So as you already heard about me, I have been teaching for a little while. I am just as so excited about having healthy waters. I'm a conservation advocate, a naturalist, but I always look forward to learning as much as possible and seeing what the new sciences are, what's going on, around the Sound and around the world. And I always look forward to learning as much as we're sharing our information this way. I look forward to learning from people like you who are in our audience today. So I'm happy to share my own experiences, but I'm also excited to learn from you. And as Beth said, she might not go into the deepest parts of her science today, but she is there. So anytime you have a question about how something works, or if your students come up with a question, the nicest thing about opportunities like what we have today are you meet people that are really not only very approachable, but great at explaining some difficult concepts that either you or your students might have misconceptions of. So I'm really excited to be here and to be working with all of you today.
I briefly want to mention, so Lee and I worked with Candace Camberell, who is not here today, but she is a co-author on the module, and she's a former teacher at North Haven High School. And so she's one of our co-conspirators and creating this module. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah. So what are we trying to do here? Well, hopefully we're all here because we want to help our students recognize that this is happening in their own backyard. We also want to help, actually, if you speak to young people, maybe even other adults in your circles, a lot of people think that climate change is something that's happening to polar bears on ice caps. We're here to help everybody recognize, especially our students, that this is happening right in their own backyard, and how to bring the latest in climate science into your own curriculum. We want to connect educators and students with relevant science that's going on right here that's associated with climate change and sea level rise. And we also want to provide some engaging activities that can be used with students to meet NGSS and ocean literacy standards. These are not, sometimes they could be daunting. We don't have the background, and this is what we're hoping to help you with today, so that there are fun things you can do with your students to not only help them see that it's here, but connect them with people who can help understand it better and have fun with it, and access a whole bunch of resources for teachers, students, community members, anybody who's interested in learning more.
Great. So we wanted to provide a little bit of background on our motivation for why we created this module. And so we're really interested in translating our research to broader audiences. So oftentimes science is done kind of isolated. There's not a lot of outreach and broader impacts. And so this was an attempt to translate our research to broader audiences and improve the understanding of habitats in our backyard. So we also wanted to provide a regionally relevant case study to help inspire the next generation of climate stewards, conservationists, and scientists. And we also wanted to humanize scientists. Sometimes students think that scientists are look like Doc from Back to the Future. They're, you know, white males, older males with frizzy white hair and lab coats. That's not what all scientists look like. And so we wanted to, part of our module kind of highlights different avenues of inquiry and done by different scientists. We have a mystery scientist activity. And so that was our way of trying to highlight how scientists are real people. And we also wanted to lower the barrier of accessibility to understanding climate science. So sometimes teachers or students are intimidated by climate science, and so we wanted to kind of provide a module with concrete, interactive, flexible activities that are accessible to all that are interested in them.
So, in a nutshell, here's what we're going to do today in this workshop with you. First of all, you should know that our audience is high school students. I see that we have an amazingly talented group of educators and others in this group. So even though that's our audience, there are so many things you can do with other audiences, just easily tailored, or you can talk to us about tailoring them for your audience. We've geared it towards a 5-day interactive material, but approximately 45 minutes each day, but you don't have to do it sequentially or in its entirety. You do what works for you. So we're going to go through the whole module day by day, but then you can pick and choose what works for you. And we also have extension activities if you have either more time or you need some online time for your students, as many of us do in this hybrid new world. And we also have modifications for things you can do to help students who need a hand. So here's the module in a nutshell. We'll be talking about climate foundations and giving some background, and then we have our case study that we'll go through, and then we have an interactive research presentation that we'll go through, and then our mystery scientist activity, yay, and then they go through a claim evidence reasoning activity where we kind of tie everything together and wrap it up.
Okay, great. And so as Lee mentioned, we broke this module into 5 days. And so these this arrow kind of highlights each part of the arrow is 1 day. And so basically the rest of this webinar, we're gonna go through each day one at a time and kind of break down what the activities are, kind of highlight some of the materials. And so we'll start with day 1, which is climate change foundations. And so in order to get students and teachers all on the same page, we provided some resources for teachers to either pre-teach before class starts or to refresh students about the basics of climate change. So Lee, do you want to mention these resources?
Yeah, and it looked like many of you were familiar with the concept of the Ed puzzle, but basically this is a really great way to see where your students are. And so Beth just clicked on it. This is a YouTube video that I found that is an animation. It's 12 minutes long, and it goes over greenhouse gases, global impacts of rising CO2 and sea level rise. And what I did was just write questions throughout the video through this Ed Puzzle app. If you're not familiar with it, you don't have to make this yourself. It's accessible, it's free. Many students already know how to use it. Once they've done it, it's a piece of cake. But basically then they go through and answer the questions as they're watching the video, and that's something that can help you assess their learning. So this is, I'm a big believer in Ed Puzzle, and I think it's actually very helpful at this point during the pandemic when we've had people going online and learning a lot on their own, and then they know their questions are a lot more guided. So, and it's free, it's crowdsourced, so you can actually copy the video and the questions as they are, or you can make your own questions to be relevant to your own students.
Great, thanks Lee. And as a disclaimer, Lee, Candace, and I created this module starting last year. And so we first made it publicly available in January 31st of this year. So we did not create this module with the intent for it to be totally virtual, but it is very flexible, and many of the components, most of the components are online. And so there's a lot of flexibility for educators, especially as you're navigating this brave new world with, you know, hybrid, remote, all in person. So there are lots of opportunities to kind of do any of the above. And so we'd be happy to answer questions about how you might implement it in different formats at the end here. Okay, so day 1 is just making sure all the students are kind of on board with the foundations of climate change. And then, so I like to use this greenhouse effect PhET. So some of you indicated that you were familiar with PhET, but PhET is it's the Physics Education Technology. That's what the acronym stands for. And they have a lot of great free interactive research-based simulations that are available to you. I've used this greenhouse effect PhET in my environmental science class and in my wetland biology course. It's a great way to really ensure that students understand, and as well as educators, it's a good way to test your own knowledge, understand the foundations of why climate change is occurring. So it utilizes, you can manipulate greenhouse gas concentrations, you can manipulate the amount of clouds or ice, and you can see what happens to infrared radiation, which is heat energy, as you manipulate these different parameters. And so I will go through a demo if there is interest at the end of the module, but I've found, let's see, I'll load it up right here. But if you haven't used this before, there's a lot of great resources for teachers. There's about 25 different activities that have already been created by teachers that you can utilize in parallel with this. So this would be a great tool to use with your students in person or remote, but they get to manipulate the greenhouse gas concentrations, for example. They can manipulate how much ice and snow and see what happens to the temperature. And so I'll go through this in more detail as a demo in the question and answer period. But this is a great way to kind of ensure your students understand what a greenhouse gas is and how increasing their concentration affects the temperature on the planet. Okay. So day 2 of the module is where we start talking about habitats in our backyard, salt marshes, right? And so I developed a case study in 2018 through the National Center for Case Study Teaching in Science, which is, so it sounds like some of you, I think 44% of you were familiar with this resource, but it's a database of case studies, science case studies that are fantastic. They're interactive. They draw students in and they get to play with data. They get to kind of put themselves in somebody else's shoes, and they're really engaging. It's a great way, I think, to teach science. And so I actually met Candace, one of our module developers, at a workshop at the University of Buffalo a few years ago, and we collaborated, and that's how I got to meet Lee and others. But so I created a case study titled "The Polar Bear of the Salt Marsh" with Christopher Field, who was a PhD student here at UConn. And so we utilized some of his data in this case study. And so the case study is the full case study, which is available to you, is a full, it is 5 parts. For this module, you can do the first 3 parts in one day. And so I'll walk you through what those 3 parts are. So the first part 1 is the phenomena, right? We're trying to engage our students. And so we start with this scenario where Katie, who's a student, walking through, she's a high school student, she's a naturalist, she loves birds, she's strolling across the salt marsh, and she comes across a nest of drowning salt marsh sparrows. So salt marsh sparrows are endemic to salt marshes in the Northeast. And so that's how we kind of draw the students in, like, what's going on? Why are there increasingly drowned nests of salt marsh sparrows? And so we wanted students to kind of think about what could be causing that. And so part 2 of the case, we encourage students to start thinking about the evidence. So could it be sea level rise? And so what evidence is there? And so we introduce concepts related to salt marsh vegetation. So in salt marshes, they're relatively simple systems because they don't have a ton of diversity in terms of the vegetation. And the plants that grow in salt marshes are very responsive to differences in flooding and salinity. So the plants sort themselves out along flood and salinity gradients. And so we get the saltiest species and the most flood tolerant species closest to the ocean. This is Spartina alterniflora. And as we go up slope and away from the ocean or the sound, we get species such as Juncus gerardi that are less flood tolerant and less salt tolerant. And so we have students do a drawing activity. I'm a very physical learner. I like to draw to reinforce concepts. And so the drawing activity could be done in a classroom on whiteboards or on big sticky notes, or it could be done online using PowerPoint or Zoom, for example, with the whiteboard function. But we have students work in groups to kind of think about, okay, which species occur where, and then what happens. So if sea level is rising, what's going to happen to these plants? Which ones would we expect to do better? Which ones would we expect to expand if it's getting wetter and saltier? And which ones would we expect to contract? And so this drawing activity really forces students to think about the biology, the adaptations of the individual species in the salt marsh, and what evidence we have for sea level rise in salt marshes in the region. So after that drawing activity, part 3 is about graph interpretation. So we provide data from Chris Field's dissertation that so it's based on 55 marshes in the Long Island Sound that were sampled in 2003 and then 10 years later in 2013. And so by sampling systematically the same locations over time, we can see shifts in the abundance of these species, and that might give us information or clues about what's going on. And so, you know, here we see a reduction in Juncus gerardii over that 10-year period, and we see an increase in Spartina alterniflora. And so we ask students, is this evidence for sea level rise? Why or why not? What other information might you need in order to justify or to make this claim that there is evidence of sea level rise? And so I think these 3 parts really force students to kind of zoom in and get to know a little bit more about the salt marsh. Parts 4 and 5 of this case study are also publicly available. They are focused more on, okay, sea level is occurring, what are we going to do about it? And so it examines the socioeconomic consequences of sea level rise. What are coastal community members going to do? Are they going to move? Are they going to abandon their house? Are they going to engage in conservation easements with conservation organizations? Are they going to put their house up on stilts? And so it's a stakeholder kind of role-playing activity in part 4 and 5 that students really love. So if you have time, that's an extension that could be used in this module. Okay, so day 3, Lee is going to talk about.
And Beth, we had a question about whether there are fact sheets available for each of the grass species. We can talk about that in either when you come back on or in the discussion. So
okay,
that's
sure.
the case studies. So day 3 is that you now are bringing either your students back into the classroom, or if you're working online, you're showing them some visuals and getting them excited about what they did yesterday or the last time you saw them. This is something that if I were in the classroom, I would have these 2 pictures, one on each side of a laminated sheet. I would probably have the healthy nest facing up when the students came into the classroom, so I didn't freak them out. But then on the opposite side, I would have the drowned nest, and I would ask them, you know, what's going on? What did we talk about yesterday? Let's debrief a little bit and connect to what we did. There is the next part in day 3 is an interactive narrated PowerPoint. It is 25 minutes long, but it is interesting. It brings tough concepts to a level that students can understand, and we've made directed notes. And I also meant to mention, especially for educators, parents, people who maybe you're running through this with your child or other people's children or adults, there are answer keys also on the module for all of this, suggested answers. So don't feel like you have to run through everything yourself and make up all of this information yourself. So these directed notes are actually really helpful. Beth just pulled them up for you. So we go through and have a think, pair, share, and you're asking students to try to connect with each other and do a little thinking. Again, you can do this online. They could do this in the classroom. You're asking them to compare and contrast carbon and nitrogen-based ecosystem services that are provided by salt marshes, what's similar, what's different, and then brainstorm some, you know, what's the big question that we're asking here. One of the things that I know we're always trying to incorporate into everything we do is, why did scientists do it this way? Why didn't they do it that way? And one of the big questions is, why did they do it so many times? You know, so we talk about replicates, and it's important to have students thinking about, you know, based on what you saw in this presentation, what should we do with these invasive species, and answer some of these questions. So this is something that you can go through with your students, and there are suggested answers that students might put down, and that should help you out. Also, if you do have time, or if you want, for me, I'll have some students at home while some students are with me. So the students at home could be reading this article, Salt Marsh Sparrows Fight to Keep Their Heads Above Water. This was from the New York Times, and kind of goes through the whole story of what's going on here. So giving a little perspective, having students do some reading. I think it's a great extension article to go with what we're doing here.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lee. So day 4. So by day 4 of this module, students will have a solid foundation and the physics of climate change, why increased greenhouse gases are increasing temperatures. They'll understand how increased temperatures are increasing the melting of the polar ice caps and thermal expansion of the water, which result in sea level rise. And so day 4, our objective was to have them gain some perspective on different avenues of inquiry and to kind of, again, humanize scientists. And so we reached out to several scientists who do research in salt marshes and asked them a standardized series of questions about what kind of research do they do, why do they do it, how do they do it. And then we asked them to create videos. And so these videos are each 5 minutes long, and they're posted on YouTube. So we have our own Salt Marsh YouTube channel that is available to you, where we have 5 mystery scientist videos. So they're labeled Mystery Scientist A, B, C, D, E. And so we have created some guided notes to encourage students to consider the what, how, and why of their assigned researcher. So you could decide, depending on your class size, and if you're in person or remote, you could split up your class and assign them to one of the 5 mystery scientists, and then have them watch the video and fill out the guided notes as they're watching the video, right? So, you know, what part of sea level rise or climate change is the scientist studying? What parts of the ecosystem is this scientist focused on? We have some that are focused on the birds, some on the grasses, some on the soils, etc. Why is the scientist focused on this in particular? How do they do their research? Are they using you know, analytical chemistry? Are they using binoculars? Are they using quadrants? So thinking about the tools. Are they doing observational, experimental studies? And how is their research currently being used, or could it be used? And I think that's really important to students sometimes see scientists as kind of this remote, faraway person, but we're trying to create connections so that students can envision themselves being scientists and can draw parallels or why this kind of science is important to their lives, right? So that is an assessment you could use to ensure that your students are doing the work. And then in order to share results so that students can learn about the mystery scientists that they, whose videos they didn't watch, you could do kind of an interactive jigsaw activity in person or remote. You could print out pictures of the mystery scientists and do some kind of matching activity. Or I think what I might do is do a compare and contrast, having the different groups come up and present, again, either on a big whiteboard with a table, mystery science A, B, C, D, E, F, no, just E, and you know what they did, using the guided notes as kind of the different rows, and so that they can compare and contrast the different mystery scientists and have the different groups present. Day 4, that's in a nutshell what day 4 is about. But depending on your timing, you could close with either a closure activity or a homework assignment where you ask the students to come up with a series of questions or a question that now that they know more about the specific scientists, their mystery scientists, what would they ask them? What would they ask them about the research, about their motivation for doing research or anything. And so this connects to our final day, day 5.
So I love the idea that Beth just said of having the students create a question. And if I were in person with students, I would have that as their ticket out the door, where they could leave once they come up with a question that they would ask their scientist. And if we had them put their name and which scientist they had, then as you collect them, you could have a great list of questions for each of those scientists and just put together a quick email. And all of the people that are in these videos would love to answer questions about their science. They, especially when the students are asking such guided questions, you know, that they have some knowledge after they watch their videos. So day 5 is where you kind of tie everything together. And again, we have a handout with some of the suggested answers that students might come up with. So you can start with having your students asking the questions, maybe go through some of those that you asked them the day before to write. And then you can have them either working in small groups or groups with online, with their partners online, and say, okay, so what do you think? What's the big picture here? Use the guided notes that you made to make a claim, and then support it. Use the evidence that you found in the videos, in your worksheets and your notes, and then go through and make a not just your statement, but don't just give us your evidence, give us the reasoning that you're saying that, and give them time to actually discuss it with each other. This is kind of a standard thing for those of you who haven't used this in the classroom. It's it looks like a lot of people were familiar with it, but this is just something that kind of lends itself to this activity. I think it's a great way to see what the kids have picked up out of this, and do they really think that this scientist is contributing to our knowledge base of climate change? And that's a great tool too to share with the scientists. We think this, or we don't think this, or we don't understand this. I think what scientists wouldn't be fascinated by how students take what they're doing and process it. So I do think that that's a very helpful tool, whether you're out in the field with students or not. And then this is something that we're particularly struggling with this year, is how to evaluate students in a way. If they are remote, it's pretty easy to evaluate them as an educator when you're seeing them in person. But when they're remote, it's a little difficult to figure out what they know from and separate that out from what they've taken from the internet or other resources. So these are some examples of things that if you need to evaluate and give a score or give a numerical or an alpha grade to students on different components of this to help you incorporate it into your classroom. So the answers to Edpuzzle is graded, and they send the results to you. The answers to the case study, just how far off base they were or whether they really seemed to get it. And then again, the PowerPoint worksheet, the mystery scientist notes, what they came up with on the CER worksheet. So these are things that would be easy to make rubrics for if you needed to account for why and how you incorporated this evaluation, this module into your current curriculum.
Great. And Leah, I just wanted to add as a reminder that all of these different handouts or assessment tools have example model answers, answer keys available to you on the module that you can click on.
Right. So I would love to know, since we have such a big diverse group, if there are parts that people want to immediately jump into with their students, that they think they would use the whole module in its entirety. Would you use pieces of it? And we have the time for Beth to go through the set if people would like to see the demo of that, which is really cool. Highly recommend it. And just this is your time to share with us and ask us questions now.
Okay, so we have a question from Chris. He says, I'm curious if there are projects or performance assessments that would fit well for students to show what they have learned.
I don't really understand the question. I'm sorry. Maybe we could unmute Chris and have Chris clarify. You mean in addition to these other evaluations?
I'll go back to the evaluation slide, but we have at least 5 concrete opportunities to evaluate students' progress and understanding of the module. Are you looking for something else, Chris?
Let's see. Would you like me to? Yeah, okay, I'll unmute you. 1 second. Okay, you should be able to unmute now, Chris.
It's Chris Williams. You have the right Chris?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so Beth, while we're waiting for Chris, just so you know, there's someone would like to see a quick example of the student answer types or the CER, what kinds of things you're looking for. And then people do want to see the FAT. You there, Chris?
He's unmuted, but we can't hear you, Chris.
Okay, well, while we're waiting for Chris to jump in here. So I'm going, this is the module that is, the link is posted. It's, so we kind of went through day 1 through 5, and we have the content covered in this center column, and then the materials with the links to them. And so, for example, the case study on day 2, we have the teaching notes and answer key posted right here. So the teaching notes kind of go through background on the case, what the objectives are, how you might manage a classroom, how long it's going to take. There is a PowerPoint slides that you can use to provide some background to your students. So it's all here. There are different kind of, like some of the, so the teachers have a deeper background in some of the topics. You know, there's a section on sea level rise, how salt marshes are being affected by sea level rise, the ecology of tidal marsh vertebrates. So it's all here in a kind of pretty short, easy to read kind of format. And then, for example.
And Beth, does that also include information about the plants on the case study? That was something someone asked earlier.
I believe, yes, it does. So there is information about, you know, some of the key things about the plants. And in the case study itself, you know, it goes through, and that's part of, it's up to the students to kind of, the information is here. So it's talking about how the different species occur in different parts of the marsh. They occur in the low marsh, and they're associated with low oxygen levels and high salt concentration. And so part of the diagramming activity is forcing students to read and translate and interpret the text into a picture. So it is all in the case with deeper background in the case notes and the answer keys.
And if I could add, yes, case study does charge, which is why, since Beth made this one, we put the answer key for the one that she made in our module. So yeah, if you go onto the case study website and look this up on the site, it will, that's a paid platform for access to all of the case studies. And I think the reason that they have that paywall is so students aren't also accessing your answer keys. But if you are using this particular one, we gave you the answer keys, the suggested student answers.
Right.
So Chris was not able to figure out his audio, but he says, yes, in addition to the 5 items you listed, I'm thinking of a project they could do locally, especially for those of us with access to a marsh.
Oh, we did not provide specific guidance on that, but I think that would be a great extension.
And what a great thing to ask those scientists is, I have a local marsh. What can I do to study changes in my local marsh?
Right, right. That's a great idea. So I would be happy to, talk with Chris or his students. But I think that would be a really great, engaging, interactive activity to have them think about, well, what could we do to examine our marsh, or examine changes in our marsh, to come up with a focus question that they could then go out and collect data with. But so, because teachers might be utilizing this in areas where they don't have access to the marsh, we did not create kind of a specific field activity, but I think there are lots of opportunities, and I'd be happy to, brainstorm with you. But I think that, having the students, put the onus on the students to kind of brainstorm and come up with some ideas about what they could do, and then I'd be happy to kind of help refine that, or think through that with them or with you.
And if I could add to that, on the Long Island side, I don't know if there's a similar extension agency. On the Connecticut side, I would assume there's something. We have field trips through Western Sussex BOCES, or our BOCES offices, where they have the equipment. So if you talk to Beth or another scientist about what your students want to do and arrange it with BOCES, they will have a person with you that will bring out waders and, seine nets and transects and whatever it is that you might need. They usually have sets of those that students can work with. So we do one at my school, or we have in the past anyway. I don't know what this year will bring, but somebody was asking about field trips for people who are able to get out in the field with students. I highly recommend talking to, as Beth recommended, somebody to help you through what can we do, but also contacting the BOCES offices about doing a salt marsh field trip, because they do a great job here at Sunken Meadow at doing that trip with us. They do a transect study with the students.
Okay, so
well, I just said, what else?
So we have quite a couple of questions, but we do have 5 minutes. So just so you know, we can keep going, but to respect people's times, just so you know, again, we are recording this and we will share all the resources and everything after the webinar.
While we're asking questions, do you think Beth could load the set so that people who wanted to see that could she could get ready to load a demo of the set while you're sorting through the questions?
If she could show yes, actually, so people wanted to see a demo of the greenhouse effect PEHT.
Yep.
PHET.
That's the set.
Yeah, and someone else wanted an example of how you do the CER and what it might look like.
Sure. So I'll walk through the FET demo, and then maybe Lee can talk through the CER. So okay. So we're on this website. There's these different tabs at the top. And so I like to start here. Carbon dioxide, 1 atom of carbon, 2 oxygens. It is a greenhouse gas. A greenhouse gas is a molecule that absorbs infrared radiation. So infrared radiation is heat, right? So if I blast this molecule of CO2 with a photon, a little packet of infrared heat energy, what's going to happen to it? So look at when this photon blaster blasts infrared radiation at CO2, not always, but often it absorbs heat energy and it reflects it, it deflects it, it often bounces it around. Sometimes the infrared heat radiation goes through it and escapes back into the atmosphere, but often it gets absorbed and it gets bounced back towards the Earth's surface. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas, and so it, as you can see, it often absorbs. So it kind of jiggles and it gets that photon or packet of heat energy gets bounced back towards the Earth's surface. Water vapor is also a greenhouse gas because it absorbs infrared radiation. How about nitrogen? So nitrogen gas is it's an inert gas. 78% of our atmosphere is N2 gas. You ask students, is this a greenhouse gas? No, because it's not absorbing infrared radiation. It does not absorb heat energy. Similar for oxygen, it's not a greenhouse gas because it does not absorb infrared radiation. You go through, so visible photons are these yellow packets of energy. So this is visible light. This is what's coming from the sun. Greenhouse gases do not absorb light energy directly from the sun. They only absorb the infrared radiation that gets radiated from the Earth's surface. Okay, so I like to start with this because it just, so what you want students to take away is that greenhouse gases absorb heat energy. They absorb and deflect heat energy. And so then I like to go to this greenhouse effect simulator, and you can manipulate a whole bunch of parameters, and it's fun for students to play with, or you could demo it in a classroom or in an online environment. But so there's a lot going on here. So you can manipulate the atmosphere, you know, to be ice age, 1750, so pre-industrial revolution, or today. And so what we see going on is we see these yellow visible light or sunlight photons coming down from the sun. And let's follow one. So I'm going to follow this one. So what happens when it bumps into the snow? So snow has high albedo, and it often reflects light energy. So we saw that yellow sunlight photon get reflected by the snow. So things that are white, ice and snow, often reflect. They have high albedo, and so they don't get absorbed. When a photon of light, I'm going to follow this one over here by the thermometer, gets absorbed by the Earth, by brown, dark surfaces, it gets absorbed and warms the Earth. And what happens is that the Earth re-radiates infrared radiation or heat energy. So heat is coming out of the Earth. And so you can kind of see some of these red heat infrared photons are kind of bouncing around the lower atmosphere. And so you can ask your students, why is that? Why is the heat kind of bouncing around? Why isn't it just escaping out into the atmosphere? And it's because they're running into greenhouse gases. We can't see them, but we know they're there because we can measure the concentration of the greenhouse gases and how they change over time. But these heat energy, sometimes we see heat energy or infrared photons escaping. Sometimes they're bumping into something and they're getting deflected and hanging out closer to the Earth's surface. And so if we do this a little bit faster, we can see these red heat molecules or heat photons kind of bouncing around close to the atmosphere. That's the greenhouse effect. It's important. We couldn't have life on the planet without the greenhouse effect. However, you know, with the advent of the Industrial Revolution and a warming climate, we have less snow and ice on the planet. So we have less reflection of light energy, we have more absorption, so we have more heat energy. And then today, and this is, you know, today, and you know, you can look at the greenhouse gas concentrations, but in the Ice Age, CO2 concentration in the atmosphere was 188 parts per million. Today, and this is a little outdated, it says it's 388 parts per million. Today, in 2020, it's closer to 405 parts per million. But greenhouse gases have increased in the atmosphere, and we can see that this heat energy it's getting trapped. It's bouncing around much more frequently near the Earth's surface because we have more greenhouse gases. This is not controversial. This is physics, and so I think that's what this simulation really drives that point home to my students. Like this is not about politics. This is the science. This is the physics behind climate change. Is that there's more greenhouse gases. They're deflecting heat energy, and that's why the temperature of our planet is warming. So I'm going to stop there, but yeah, go ahead, Lee.
I was going to say there's some comments, and I'm seeing some feeling the same way myself, that your explanation is so good that it would be great to have this running with your narration, like a video of this, of you just talking through some things that you're observing as you're changing and manipulating these levels. Because this is really, and some of the teachers are thinking like for their own students, they could be making this and speaking to whatever the topic is they're trying to teach and having students manipulate it while they're going through it. That would be really cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Definitely having a professional describing what you're seeing really makes it more clear. I agree with that. It's a great website. Also, there were some people who asked questions about the fact there are about, I think we saw 25 different activities that teachers have made that have worksheets and, you know, all kinds of things that you can go in so many directions on this website too. So you can play around with that even more. It's such a neat, just having access to it. I had never seen it before this. So I like when the disciplines of science collide because there is so much physics in what we do that helps us understand more about biology and chemistry and geology. Somebody wanted me to go through the CER, and I don't know if you can access the module while we're talking, but if you have not used them before, the student handout that we linked on our PowerPoint here is only one of the options that we have on the actual module. On the module itself, we understand that sometimes people who haven't worked with them or students who haven't worked with them, they might not know where to get started. So we actually made a modified one in addition to the answer keys. Yeah, Beth, if you can go to that, see all the choices there? You have the CER as we showed it on the PowerPoint, but you also have some sentence starters to get kids going if they're just sitting there stuck, like, okay, what do I do here? So this is just to kind of say, all right, well, do I think, first of all, who is my scientist? Do I think they are or are not helping me and everybody else understand more about climate change? So here's my first piece of evidence or data. And basically, this is just, CERs are kind of, they're not new ways of teaching because we probably all used these in the past when we say to students, could you clarify that? Or where are you getting that idea? Or where did you read that? It's just something that's kind of a standardized part of the NGSS now that this is the wording that they're using. So many students are, many districts are trying to get students used to using these words. What is your evidence? Go back into what you've learned and pull out what's giving you data to answer this question. So did the scientists say something that would indicate to you that they are collecting something about climate change? And if you watch the videos, the scientists will tell you the tools that they're using or how long they've been doing their study, or they'll give you a lot of information about that. So then we've just asked the students to come up with 3 different things that they saw over the course of the week that give them that evidence. And then using their evidence, the 3 things that they just told you, now give us the reasoning. Did that support your evidence? And if not, then okay, then we need to go back in and discuss it. But if it did support your evidence, then you don't really have to keep wondering if what you said is true or not. So it's just, it's almost like a way of very drawn out way of getting kids to acknowledge how your thinking process. So I hope that helped if people haven't used the CER before. What other questions did people have that we have, like, in the time we have left? Did you want to show the answer key, that was the sample answers? There's also a sample grading rubric, but these are some of the ideas of things that students might come up with.
And someone was asking about, I'm not sure what website they were talking about, but someone said I did try to view answer keys and the site prompted me to join for $25 to get the answer key.
That was the
way
case
to access.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we addressed that, that the case study system does charge, and that's why the case study that we used here, you have the answer key. You don't need to pay for anything if you go through the link from here.
So here's the answer key. I just link to it from the module. Teaching notes and answer key, right here. So we posted them here. And you'll see that they're not very, a lot of these are open-ended and are really, you know, so there are many answers for many of these questions. And so these are, you know, model answers you could use, but.
Same thing with the CER. There's a lot of ideas to get you as a teacher thinking about what your students could say that would make sense.
Right.
Okay, great, thank you. Someone asked, are we able to share these resources with our teachers? Of course, absolutely. And again, I'll be sharing everything here at the end. Someone asked, do these studies use the meter quadrants or smaller? Not sure.
We did use meter, 1 by 1 meter quadrats when we were quantifying vegetation cover in our study. And that's a very simple tool that, you know, you can get the materials at a hardware store and put together. If you had an opportunity to go out to a wetland or a salt marsh with your students, and you know, it's fascinating. You plop it down and you say, what do you see? What's there? How much of it is there? How do you know? And so just, you know, start with some very basic things. You can really inspire a lot of questions. And you know, how do we ensure that we're consistent, like across sampling teams or across plots? And there's all kinds of things you can do with the quadrat frame.
And we have the ones that we've used in the past, people have done very creative things with string. So you measure out string, and then when you're on the bus, you have a bucket, or if you're just walking out into the field with students, you have a piece of string and they shape it into a square. So you tie it on the end in, you know, you just measure out the string ahead of time, and then they shape it into a square when they get in the field, which is easier to carry. Other people have used hula hoops. So as long as you're consistent, what you have works for you. And Beth, I did have a question about contacting the mystery scientists. Did they give their email addresses in the videos? If somebody wanted to contact a mystery scientist or you, or our email addresses are here at the end of the PowerPoint, so you'll have access to that. And you know, we could certainly forward your questions or whatever, but if they wanted to do a Ask a Scientist type question.
Yeah, in the video, the mystery scientist reveal, where they state who they are, what institution they're from, I don't think that they include their email. I am certain that they would all be happy to get questions. I will confirm that, and I can, you know, I can update this module and just add maybe the mystery scientist contact emails, so that teachers and students could email them. But that's a great suggestion.
And also, if those scientists are interested in this, they may be interested in the Skype a Scientist program, which is a formal program that's run, I'm not sure, maybe through Sea Grant, but that is a formal program where students and classrooms can come up with a list of questions and then speak with a scientist about a particular topic.
Right. Yeah. Skype a Scientist was created by a grad student at UConn in the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology department. But I would be happy to participate in that, either, you know, through that program, or, you know, just informally we could set up a Zoom or, you know, WebEx call, and I'd be happy to talk to students. But yeah, I think these scientists are, you know, interested in translating their knowledge, their experiences with students, and so I would not hesitate to reach out to them.
Is there anyone in the chat who is still here who has a question that hasn't been answered, that we missed your question? I just want to be respectful of everybody's time and hear everyone.
Yeah, we have a couple, but maybe we can do one more, and then if we miss your question, maybe can they email you their question? Okay, yep. Great. People are saying that they don't envision being able to take field trips this year with the precautions and everything, but someone said, I'm thinking of preparing virtual field trips in the salt marsh. What data would you collect to stimulate students to design remote investigations? They say, I'm thinking temperature, salinity, plant biodiversity, transect setting, but what nitrogen measurements would you take, sediment or water, etc.? Do you have any ideas there?
Wow, that's a great question. I love the idea of having, virtual field trips. I'm going to do the same. I'm teaching a 100-person wetland biology and conservation course this fall, and I'm planning to take some, GoPro type videos. But I'm not as far along as you are in thinking about what I'm going to do with them. So in terms of, it is challenging. So like when we measure carbon and nitrogen based processes, it involves a lot of lab work. And so it's, what's interesting about our research findings is that we found that the vegetation growing in the salt marsh are very indicative of the rates of soil respiration and nitrogen removal. And so, a teacher could use, if they use this module in conjunction with like a virtual video, we found, for example, that Phragmites australis, the big tall invasive grass that grows around the edge of the marsh, or dominates many marshes, is particularly good at holding on to carbon and at releasing nitrogen. So you could kind of use those qualitatively as indices of carbon and nitrogen cycling. Oh, we have a lot of Phragmites here, so that there's likely a lot of nitrogen being removed. We have a lot of native grasses that are removing less nitrogen and holding less carbon. But I think without, quantifying the rates and the amounts, I think it's beyond the scope of what you can do remotely. We do that in a laboratory setting.
And somebody mentioned some of us use Google Tour or are just learning to use Google Tours. There are a lot of pictures of different sites already out there on Google that you can make a tour through Google Tour Creator to share places with your students. I've seen teachers put GoPros on their heads and walk around the marsh, and what they're seeing is what students are seeing. Someone was a little confused about the mystery scientist, and just to clarify, all 5 scientists, well, spoiler alert, Beth is one of them, but they are all contributing to our knowledge of better understanding climate change and sea level rise on salt marshes. And we're hoping that your students that will be immediately clear to your students after they start writing these things down that the scientists say. It's not like we picked one scientist who's the person who's studying salt marshes and everyone else is doing something else. They're all contributing in different ways. So that's something that we wanted to impart to the students. It's not just the person studying the grasses. It's not the person studying the birds. It's not just the person studying the sediment.
The sediments, yeah. We have a microbial biologist that's studying the bacteria in the soil.
Yeah. So I hope that helps clarify that once you, the teacher or the educator or the parent, watch the videos, you'll see kind of the idea behind the mystery scientist is to show that there are lots of different people working on this problem.
Absolutely. All right. So questions keep coming in, but what I might do is just compile them and send them to you or something like that so that everybody can get their questions answered. Again, I'll be providing all of the resources that Beth and Lee have provided here at the end in an email. Yeah, because we're almost 20 minutes over now.
And remember that the participants wanted to know if they could continue collaborating, find each other. So maybe, I don't know, is there a way to let them share information if they want to?
That's a great idea.
Yeah, people will show great ways that they use the module, things that worked for online learning versus in person. It'd be great to collaborate.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, I like share the participant list today or something like that so that people can find each other maybe?
Yeah, maybe ask, you could send an email that says, would you like to be included on a participant list to collaborate with others? Because maybe people won't mind and then people who do can be left off.
That's a great idea. Okay, so then thank you everyone for joining us today. Beth and Lee, thank you so much for the webinar. This was excellent.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you to the attendees and everybody.
This is fun. I'm excited that people are enthusiastic about it, and I hope that you use it, and we love feedback and how to improve it. I'm hoping Lee and I get to work together in the future to build more things like this, and so and we can always modify this. This is, you know, a document on a website, but we can change the document and add additional resources, but your feedback would be really useful.
Absolutely. And after you close out of Zoom, you'll be redirected to a survey, and there you can let us know what your input on the webinar, and you can let me know suggestions for what you'd like to see next. All right, so with that, I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll be in touch. Oh, go ahead, Lee.
As we say goodbye, I could say, please, please join the organizations online that'll help you. All of these things are always posted in the Long Island Marine Educators, the National Marine Educators, the New York Marine Educators, Southern New England, Astronomy, the New Marine Educators. There's so many professional groups that share all of these pieces of information. Please join them.
Yes, absolutely. That's where we always bombard with flyers for when we have these things.
Great.
All right. Thank you so much again to our speakers and to everybody who came to our webinar. Have a great day, everyone.